Hello everyone. On September 10, 2025, American conservative activist Charlie Kirk was fatally shot while speaking at an event at Utah Valley University, sending shockwaves through U.S. society. This tragic incident brings to mind a similar event 61 years ago, the assassination of political activist Martin Luther King Jr. Today, we will take you through the life of this great leader, from his childhood faith and experiences with injustice, to his path of nonviolent activism, and finally to his assassination, as well as the lasting impact of his spirit. If you want to learn more about Dr. King's story and the civil rights movement that changed history, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. You can also share this video with friends so more people can get to know this remarkable leader. When we think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one phrase almost immediately comes to mind: I have a dream. It was August 28, 1963, in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., where more than 250,000 people had gathered. Dr. King's voice rang out like a bell across the American sky. His dream was not only the dream of African Americans, but a universal dream of equality and dignity for all humanity. Yet, the greater the dream, the stronger the resistance. Today, we will revisit not only the shining moments of this civil rights leader, but also the shadow that marked the end of his life. On April 4, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, a single gunshot ended Dr. King's life at the young age of 39, making his dream all the more tragic and poignant in the face of such violence. Dr. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Both his father and grandfather were Baptist ministers, which meant that from a young age, he was immersed in the language and teachings of the Bible. As a child, he was used to standing in the church, watching his father deliver passionate sermons from the pulpit. That power of awakening hearts through words was deeply ingrained in his soul from an early age. At the same time, he also experienced the harsh realities of racial segregation early on. In elementary school, he had a white friend with whom he was very close. But when they reached school age, his friend's parents suddenly told them, whites and blacks cannot go to school together. This absurd rule made young Martin feel for the first time the pain of being rejected, simply because of the color of his skin. Yet this mark of injustice did not lead him toward hatred. Instead, it set him on a path in search of justice. During his studies in seminary and at university, Dr. King was exposed to the ideas of India's Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi promoted India's independence through nonviolent resistance, which deeply inspired him. Dr. King gradually came to believe that true change should not rely on violence or revenge, but on the power of love and nonviolence. In 1955, at the age of 26, he had just become a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. That same year, an African-American woman, Rosa Parks, was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. This incident ignited the anger of the African-American community, who launched the Montgomery bus boycott, a 381-day protest. Leading this movement was the young Dr. King. The boycott showcased the power of nonviolent resistance to the entire nation and catapulted Dr. King into the spotlight as a central figure in the civil rights movement. However, changing the system was far from easy. By the 1960s, American society appeared prosperous on the surface, yet it was riddled with deep contradictions. Southern states still enforced strict racial segregation. Black people could not freely enter white restaurants, attend the same schools, or even use the same restrooms and drinking fountains. Attempting to vote often meant facing numerous obstacles. Simply because of their skin color, African Americans could be beaten or even killed by the police without cause. Under such pressure, the African American community gradually split into two opposing voices. One followed Dr. King, advocating nonviolent, love-driven resistance, while the other turned toward radical approaches, exemplified by figures like Malcolm X and organizations such as the Black Panther Party, believing that armed resistance was necessary against white oppression. Amid this tug-of-war between radical and conservative, violence and nonviolence, Dr. King stood firm yet isolated. He understood that violence would only lead to more bloodshed, whereas nonviolence had the potential to touch hearts and change minds. However, Dr. King did not face only external social pressures. He also encountered hostility from government agencies. At the time, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover harbored intense animosity toward Dr. King. Hoover feared that King's activities could spark social unrest, and even suspected him of having ties to communists. The FBI not only wiretapped his phones for years, but also planted informants and attempted to discredit his private life. Even more shocking, the FBI once anonymously sent him a letter suggesting that he should commit suicide to prevent a scandal from being exposed. These historical files were later made public, revealing to the world that a government agency had regarded one of its own citizen leaders as a threat. This meant that in that era, Dr. King had to fight not only against the towering walls of societal racial discrimination, but also remain wary of the cold, scrutinizing gaze from the heart of power itself. The 1963 March on Washington brought Dr. King to the peak of his fame. But as time went on, his dream began to touch deeper wounds. He spoke not only about black equality, but also began to criticize the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War. He said, "A nation that spends billions of dollars on war, but cannot solve the problem of poverty, is heading for destruction." These words caused even more people in power to see him as a troublemaker. By this point, he was no longer merely advocating for black rights. He was challenging the very structure of America's system and its foreign policy. And when a dream touches the core of power, it often becomes dangerous. In early 1968, Dr. King came to Memphis, Tennessee, to support the strike of local African American sanitation workers. He saw the workers holding signs that read, "I am a man." Behind those words lay the most fundamental demand: dignity. Yet during this time, he increasingly felt the shadow of death drawing near. He once told his wife, "Darling, I may not live to see 40. In one of his speeches, he spoke with a prophetic tone, "I have been to the mountaintop. I may not get there with you, but I have seen the promised land." Not long after, a bullet took his life. In the spring of 1968, Memphis grew hot and humid, with the streets carrying a mixture of odors: garbage heaps, motor oil, and morning smoke. The city was not large, yet its social fractures ran deep. The African American community had long been marginalized, and the lowest paid workers were often sanitation workers. Their efforts and their sweat had never truly earned them respect. When Dr. King and members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, arrived in Memphis, he knew he was confronting more than just a labor strike. He faced the broader social tensions of the entire city and even the nation. The black community in Memphis suffered ongoing discrimination, while white authorities were mostly indifferent, if not openly hostile. Dr. King arranged a series of meetings and speeches, striving to find a middle ground between the striking workers and the city government. He understood that his presence was both a symbol of hope and a potential magnet for danger. Every step he took in the city felt like walking a tightrope, and each breath carried the weight of uncertainty. On the evening of April 3rd, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech at Mason Temple in Memphis. The lights glowed a dim yellow, the air was slightly stifling, and the hall was packed with an audience that sat quietly, fully attentive. Dr. King stood at the podium, dressed in a dark suit, his voice deep and powerful. He spoke of poverty, of social injustice, and of hope. His words flowed like a river, yet carried an unprecedented weight. He spoke the historic line, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." When he finished, the audience fell silent, as if the world had paused for a moment. The words felt like both a prophecy and a whisper to fate. For Dr. King, this was no ordinary speech. It was a rehearsal of life itself, for he knew all too well that he stood amid grave danger. On the evening of April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. returned to the Lorraine Motel, a modest two-story establishment whose unremarkable exterior belied the history about to unfold. Accompanied by his aides and confidants, he walked up to the second-floor balcony, discussing plans for the following day and strategies to support the striking workers. The air was heavy and warm. A ceiling fan stirred the room with a faint breeze. From the street below came the occasional hum of passing cars and the echo of footsteps, sounds that felt distant against the motel's quiet stillness. Dr. King gazed down at the street, his thoughts drifting between the future and the present. He reflected on a lifetime of struggle, on the hopes of millions of African Americans, and on the dangers his very presence might bring to those around him. Not far away in the shadows, a man named James Earl Ray was preparing to take the most fatal step of his life. He carried a rifle, his movements calm and deliberate, his aim fixed on the balcony where Dr. King would soon stand. Ray had not been born evil, once only a petty criminal, but in that moment, driven by fear, prejudice, and greed, he transformed into an assassin. At 6:05 p.m., as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the second-floor balcony and waved to the crowd below, a gunshot split the Memphis air. The bullet tore through his neck with lethal speed, silencing his breath and heartbeat in an instant. His aides on the balcony cried out, the crowd scattered in panic, and the air inside the motel seemed to freeze. Rushed to the hospital, Dr. King was soon pronounced dead at the age of just 39. On that day, the world lost a great soul, and the crack of that rifle left an eternal echo in history. News of his assassination spread quickly, igniting unrest in more than 100 cities across the United States. Streets burned, stores were looted, and grief intertwined with rage. President Lyndon B. Johnson appealed to the nation to reject blind violence and urged Congress to swiftly pass civil rights legislation. He called Dr. King an apostle of nonviolence, hoping to carry his dream forward through law. The response was not only an expression of mourning, but also an affirmation of hope. In that moment, American society stood amid sorrow and fury, yet quietly, profoundly, it began to change. A few weeks later, on June 8th, James Earl Ray was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport. He was charged with using a rifle to assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Prosecutors argued that Ray had rented a room in a boarding house near the motel, where he took aim with a rifle equipped with a scope. His fingerprints were found on the weapon, and the evidence left at the scene pointed directly to him. On March 10, 1969, Ray pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But soon afterward, he recanted, claiming he had been a victim of a larger conspiracy. A congressional investigation later reaffirmed the conclusion that Ray was the assassin. Still, Dr. King's family, including his son Dexter, publicly met with Ray and called for a new investigation. Rumors and controversy continued to swirl around the case, but one fact remained. The death of Dr. King was a historical reality that forever altered the course of the American civil rights movement. The news of Dr. King's assassination struck the nation like a massive stone dropped into a still lake, sending shockwaves across the country. It was not merely grief, it was a deep, burning anger and despair. A sudden death had ignited years of pent-up frustration. From New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Atlanta, Black communities poured into the streets. Their sorrow was intertwined with fury, erupting into an unprecedented outpouring of collective emotion. The streets filled with smoke. Storefront windows were shattered, shelves overturned, and flames consumed buildings. People shouted Dr. King's name, demanding justice and equality. Every street corner, every block felt like a battlefield, charged with pain and rage beyond words. These protests were not only expressions of mourning, but also a searing indictment of systemic injustice. In the midst of this nationwide mourning, white America, too, felt the shock. President Lyndon B. Johnson addressed the nation in a solemn televised speech, his voice heavy and deliberate. He urged Americans to reject blind violence, Calling Dr. King an apostle of nonviolence, he pressed Congress to swiftly pass the civil rights legislation then under debate. Johnson stressed that the law was not just words on paper, but a promise of social justice and a way to carry forward Dr. King's vision. Dr. King's death compelled many to reflect on the true meaning of nonviolent resistance. During his life, he faced criticism for opposing the Vietnam War and skepticism from younger, more radical activists, yet he never wavered in his commitment to peaceful struggle. His philosophy was not weakness, it was courage, rooted in the belief that change could be achieved through dialogue and conscience. After his passing, this conviction was carried forward by protesters across the nation. At the same time, Congress, under mounting pressure, accelerated the legislative process. Civil rights bills that once required prolonged debate now gained urgency, with King's assassination serving as a catalyst. Lawmakers understood that delay would mean more unrest and would dishonor the legacy of a great leader. Finally, on April 11, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, prohibiting discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. This landmark legislation was seen as a vital extension of the civil rights movement and a historic affirmation of Dr. King's life and vision. Beyond legal texts, King's ideals began to take root across society. Schools placed greater emphasis on teaching racial equality. Community organizations emerged to support disadvantaged groups, improve housing, and expand job opportunities. Many cities established commemorations in his honor, celebrating his spirit of nonviolence and justice. These efforts, though they could never replace his lost life, carried his dream forward, helping society find strength to move on in the midst of grief. Dr. King's family, especially his wife, Coretta Scott King, shouldered immense social and familial responsibilities after his death. Rather than retreating, she bravely carried forward her husband's mission, continuing to support the striking sanitation workers in Memphis and pushing for broader social reform. Her courage and perseverance became a vital force that kept the civil rights movement moving forward, revealing to the world the steadfast power behind nonviolent resistance. Yet even in mourning, controversy persisted. Dr. King's assassination and the conspiracy theories surrounding it left the nation divided. James Earl Ray initially admitted guilt during his trial, only to later retract his confession and claim he was the victim of a larger plot. These disputes did not diminish the impact of King's vision. Instead, they reminded the world that the pursuit of justice is often winding, and that uncovering historical truth requires patience and persistence. Dr. King's death also pushed many moderate African American activists toward more radical movements, shaping a new phase of black civil rights activism in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The rise of the Black Panther Party and the Black Power movement, though diverging from King's philosophy of nonviolence, gained momentum precisely because his vision and sacrifice had made it impossible for society to ignore the voices of black communities. In this way, his legacy continued to expand the struggle for equality and justice, bringing unprecedented attention to these urgent issues. Dr. King is still regarded today as the most representative leader in African American history and the most powerful symbol of the civil rights movement. His words carried both strength and poetry. His actions revealed courage and wisdom, and his vision transcended race, nationality, and generations, becoming a beacon for all who pursue equality and justice around the world. Almost immediately after his death, campaigns began to establish a national holiday in his honor. Although the movement initially faced setbacks, including the release of FBI surveillance files alleging extramarital affairs and supposed communist influence, supporters never gave up. In 1983, after more than a decade of advocacy and public pressure, President Ronald Reagan signed legislation designating the third Monday of January as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, ensuring that the legacy of this great leader would be permanently honored. Dr. King's life, though brief, burned like a flame, illuminating one of the darkest hours of a people. Armed with nonviolence and the power of words, he confronted entrenched racial inequality, reshaping laws, education, social institutions, and the very conscience of society. His life and his death demonstrated the transformative force of courage and ideals, teaching the world that true leadership is not about holding power, but about awakening justice and empathy within the human heart. Amid the national mourning and the legislative momentum that followed, people gradually came to understand that Dr. King's passing was not an ending, but a beginning. His vision lived on in laws, in schools, and in grassroots movements. His words echoed in speeches, writings, and oral histories. His spirit resurfaced in every peaceful protest and every challenge to injustice. Across the river of history, his presence endures like a lighthouse, illuminating the path forward and reminding humanity that even in the face of violence, prejudice, and death, the conviction of justice and peace can remain unyielding and everlasting. The following June, James Earl Ray was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport. Once a petty criminal with a history of small offenses, he became infamous worldwide for a single bullet. According to prosecutors, witnesses reported seeing Ray carrying a bundle as he fled an apartment building near the Lorraine Motel, the very place from which the fatal shot had been fired through a bathroom window. At the scene, police discovered Ray's fingerprints, along with a sniper rifle, binoculars, and a scope. On March 10, 1969, Ray admitted to the murder of Dr. King and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Shockingly, no witnesses testified during the entire trial, and Ray remained low-key and silent in court. Shortly after the verdict, he recanted, claiming he was a victim of a conspiracy and revealing to the public what he described as a complex and baffling assassination plot. These claims sparked renewed debate and controversy. Was Dr. King's death the act of a lone gunman, or the result of a deeper political and social conspiracy? Dr. King's family, especially his son Dexter, even met with Ray publicly, calling for the case to be reopened in pursuit of the truth. They argued that the court's verdict alone could not fully reveal what had happened, and that history demanded an investigation into possible conspiracies and hidden forces behind the assassination. Beyond the justice system, Dr. King's wife, Coretta Scott King, shouldered an immense social and emotional responsibility. The unfinished work of her husband and the civil rights movement fell squarely on her shoulders. After Dr. King's death, she continued advocating for the rights of the striking Memphis sanitation workers, initiated social reforms, and carried forward her husband's philosophy through peaceful, nonviolent means. Her steadfastness not only ensured the continuation of Dr. King's spirit, but also demonstrated to the world that the power behind nonviolent resistance is both strong and enduring. Previously classified FBI surveillance records on Dr. King were made public, revealing flaws in his personal life and alleged connections to so-called communists. While some social commentators use these documents to attack Dr. King, they also expose the extent of monitoring and suppression directed at dissenters by the power structures of American society at the time. It is worth noting that Dr. King's assassination bears similarities to the 1965 killing of Malcolm X. Regardless of the methods, the deaths of both leaders had profound impacts on the African American community. Moderate activists were galvanized by the rise of radical forces, giving momentum to the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party. This historical turning point was both a continuation of tragedy and a catalyst for structural social change. Today, we look back on the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., from his childhood faith and experiences of injustice, to his path of nonviolent resistance, and finally to his assassination, along with the enduring impact of his spirit. As for the assassination of Charlie Kirk, whether it will have a similar effect remains unknown, but one thing is certain: it will change the way American society thinks. If you want to learn more stories, remember to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. You can also share this video with more friends so that more people can learn about this remarkable leader.